Hey everyone, let's continue with the second part of the most complex RPGs. If you haven't seen the first video, I'll leave the link in the description, and also consider that I won't dive deep. Now, before jumping into the list, I have already shared some of these games, so I don't want to repeat some entries. But Nights in the Nightmare is a must. Properly understand what you're doing in this game takes a good chunk of time. Labyrinth of Galerian Refrain have really complex character creation and management. They are kinda similar, and while messing things up along the journey, it's so easy. During the end of the second arc and pretty much the whole third arc into a nightmare. Hydra Union has a quite complex system where you need to understand what you're doing with your cards and the difference between units, when to retaliate, when to stop, and stuff like that. Whatever the case, I will also share some honorable mentions and a bonus RPG, perhaps the most convoluted one. Let's begin with a strategic game with some RPG elements. Or at least I consider it like that because you're constantly upgrading your mechs, but it is not a proper RPG on its own. Once that is out of the way, Mech Engineer is one of those games where the dev is finished and threw the manual, tutorials, and everything out of the window. So the learning curve in this thing is simply brutal. So in all honesty, if you wanna play this thing, check some tutorials. In any case, Mech Engineer has some amazing ideas, but it takes a good chunk of time to understand what's going on. Here you need to assemble your mechs since the beginning, and it's going to depend a lot from the kind of weapons you wanna use. Some require to be cooled, while others benefit from taking lots of energy, giving you some amazing pierce damage. The thing here is that you can modify the reactors in dumb ways, where ironically you can neglect some bonuses by mixing things, so check internal and external resistances. It is important to check the numbers of what every module does, but the main purpose with the reactors is to give the right amount of energy. Keep in mind that it is also possible to use nuclear and thermal reactors for different purposes. Then you can jump into the weapons, and yep, they can also be modified in different ways, increasing the rate of fire, accuracy, its damage, weight, energy consumption, and so on. What is punishing is that you need to find the sweet spot to build your mech, because sometimes little changes deliver completely different results, but you can throw lots of different things like shotgun-like feeling, fire damage, extra pierce. Just be careful, some weapons have 0 pierce attribute, so check little details. And of course the city that you protect has lots of little things. So once all of that was properly managed, you can jump out there and get wrecked like the first time you played a Soulsborne game, or something along those lines. So I just recommend this game for those who like to dive into a lot of details with no real direction. Let's continue with Unicorn Overlord. Okay, this game is relatively easy, but quite complex to understand, or at least the first 10 hours I was like, yeah, it seems like a good idea. Here what matters the most is understanding your tactics. Every character has different skills, some will be acquired by using items, others through levels and stuff like that. What matters here is the kind of condition in which you trigger certain skills. So for example, here Celeste has 3 actions, where 2 prioritize cavalry, and 1 if there is a full column. But this is not the best way to leave your skills, because she's going to go through that specific order, like check 1, check 2, and so on. So ideally you want to set the skills that work the best for what you wanna do, and then place multiple conditions that can help you out under those specific circumstances. On paper it is easy to explain, but the more you advance in the story, the more you need to check some of these details, as changing conditions can turn the course of the battle into a completely different direction. This turns particularly important in the last stretch of the game, because sometimes you need to push some skills a bit first as a form to debuff or neglect certain actions. Where it turns a bit wacky is when you start to fight battles against full squads, because that is when classes, formation, skills, conditions, support and other things in between start to matter. Now in all honesty here, I don't completely understand how some of these things work, but it was more about having a decent idea of the multiple units and their purpose. However, I am almost sure that in higher difficulties you need to get all those details. The next game I want to talk about is Monster Hunter. In general, Monster Hunter could be finished without understanding one bit of its combat mechanics. While probably the older entries like Monster Hunter DOS had much more tactical things to consider, the fact is that here I am talking about a really popular game with a steep learning curve. But what is the most complex side of these games? As I explained once, Playing with the lance is one of the easiest things to do, but mastering its use is a whole different topic. The same principle applies with any other weapon. However, it is fair to mention that the charged blade has some wacky guides with so many details that the thing is quite intimidating. In any case, to be completely fair and transparent, you can watch some of my first hunts and then a no armor run. The thing with this game lies in fully understand how you can combo certain things, the ways in which the monsters move, and the frames in which certain actions can be executed without getting hit. But is that the whole deal? Nope. We are just getting started. While the most recent entries have become a bit more of a go out there and bully the monster, another important step to understand is the kind of playstyle you wanna throw in between. Then again, I can only explain the lance, but this is a weapon that can be used in so many ways, out of speedrunning, that it surprises. You can go for evasion, tanking, offensive, or even fast gameplay. All of this is accompanied through the different builds you can create, and you can spend so much time into fine-tuning your build and how you played with it. That is where most people have issues understanding how to combine stuff, and then Capcom has to nerf monsters, otherwise most aren't able to beat the game. So that is pretty much how this entry works. The whole deal of getting how to make builds and using a weapon can take a lot of time, where oftentimes the player believes that just by using a build, they are going to become good. So yeah, this entry is a little bit of a meme for me, but that is how it works. Let's continue with Xenoblade Chronicles X. Now this is an ironic entry here, because you can finish this whole game without understanding one bit of what you're doing. In essence, it is not that complicated, until you try to fight some bosses out there, and start to wonder why you're so bad, even if your whole team is equipped. Okay, let's break down some of the basics. In Xenoblade X there are multiple classes that can be mastered. Of course, the more you're trained, the more the skills you will have at your disposal, and in other words, ways to build your character. But the most basic about the skills or arts come with understanding their color, because that dictates the effect or damage. For example, green and blue are buffs, with the difference that auras oftentimes come with roids, stacking multiple effects or simply giving great bonuses. Yellow are range, orange are melee, and purple debuffs. With this explained, oftentimes while training a class, the kind of auras, debuffs, buffs, and so on makes sense for the kind of class it's being trained. The difference while combining skills comes with the little synergies that you need to keep in mind. For example, if you topple the enemy, you also want to take advantage of that, so you can combine that skill with a follow-up to deal extra damage to topple enemies. One of the things I struggle in this game is that there are few auras that heal your HP, reason why the Bastion Warrior is perhaps considered as the easy class. So the question may be, how do I heal myself and my characters? You can do that through soul voices and challenges. There is a section where you can customize each character depending on the skill or ways in which you are playing. So you do not necessarily need to carry every single kind of art, and it is through soul voices that you can get different bonuses, and it is easy to know which skills to use as your arts start to flash. So keep in mind which soul voices to use and activate the ones your party members ask for. That way you can constantly recover HP and keep morale up, which subsequently throws more souls challenges your way. So this is perhaps one of the most important things to understand in the game. Other useful thing to consider is that your defense doesn't tell the whole story, because you can get some decent numbers there and still get wrecked. So the thing that actually matters is your resistance. And also remember that you can break enemy parts. This gives you the chance to deal extra damage and get more loot. In the next entry, let's check another cousin of D&D, Pathfinder, Wrath of the Righteous. In comparison with the first entry I talked about in the previous video, this is the polar opposite. The character creation takes ages. Now here it depends how you wanna look at it, because this Pathfinder can be stupidly overwhelming with these first choices. For example, let's talk about one class, the Barbarian. I want to believe all of us can guess what a Barbarian does in most gaming settings. I mean in comparison to other complex classes like Wizards, Artificers, Shamans, Sorcerers or stuff like that in your average TRPG. You Barbarian, you Unga Bunga, unless you're an instinctual warrior raised by humans with some added wisdom. That way perhaps you Unga, therefore you Bunga. But let's say that you wanna have some heavy armor in between. Sure, you can do it with an armor hull, or maybe the buffer with a pack rapier. Now the thing here is that you can select so many things in between, like class, race, background, abilities, skills, and so on. to the point where every character is going to be completely different. And yeah, I do believe it is worth experimenting and try to do things however you consider. Otherwise you are taking out one of the best selling points in these kind of games, which is being creative. But to be fair, try to take easy classes while you're learning the basics of the game. So stay away from most magic users. Oftentimes people struggle with wizards, druids, arcanists and stuff like that. The classes that are relatively easy to use are barbarians, fighters, rogue, rangers, cavaliers, paladins, and so on. Usually those units are a bit more straightforward. So after spending a good chunk of time creating your character, this is just the prelude of what's going to happen in its gameplay. Because the game will throw choices left and right, choices that have an impact and change the world little by little. Some of the most classic recommendations for your party composition is to allocate a healer and a tank. I could argue a bit about a magic user or buffers, but there are works around. So aside from a healer and a tank, you can also experiment a bit with different classes that can deal damage in different ways. Just keep in mind that there are plenty of enemies with resistances, so it is always a good idea to have multiple plans at your disposal. On the same front, about party composition, its formation has to make sense with what you're doing, so tank on the very front, damage dealers that can receive some hits a bit on the sides, and whatever that needs some range can take the mid or back of the formation. Before jumping into the action, remember to buff your characters, and beware that there are a lot of options that you can change at any moment, like the difficulty, enemies, when to stop auto battles, and many more details. But let's cut it here. As honorable mentions, as I introduce strategic games in the list, it is fair to say that the games like Crusader King and Hearts of Iron are so freaking complex. Never gave myself the time to understand what was happening, but something was happening. Other strategic game that has a stupidly steep learning curve is Field of Glory. As for RPGs, I know that Resonance of Fate is quite wacky, but I don't really know about that entry, and of course Baldur's Gate. And as the bonus entry, considered to be the most unfair RPG with convoluted mechanics, the real life. Currently there are 8 billions of players, but the character creation goes pretty much by RNGs, so things can go out of hand quite quickly, and it turns quite wacky the moment you have to choose a job. Now in my case I am an artificer with something like a saint as a subclass. What is ironic is that probably because of my subclass of saint, that occasion when I consumed a debuffer to acquire Cosmic Eye, the thing didn't kick in. But be careful, don't play the ices, and keep in mind that there are other debuffers in life. Worst you can do is combine up to 3 and you get the curse effect named Deity Audience, where you swear that you won't commit the same mistakes, but it is what it is. In any case, while leveling up you can forget the skills, and reaching higher levels oftentimes comes with multiple debuffs. And beware that there are multiple players attempting to write the guides, but oftentimes RNGs and the multiple checks that you have to roll don't align quite well. With that, I hope you found this video informative. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.